Hello, my name is Jeff, and this ridiculously bright orange thing behind me is the 2025 GMC Hummer EV SUV 3X. Over 9,000 pounds of engineering excess. And though it may look broken right now with the wheels facing different directions and lifted awkwardly, I assure you it's not. It's just flexing some of its cool off-road features. For 2025, the Hummer EV SUV starts at $96,000 for the 2-motor version. Today we'll be reviewing the 3-motor version with 830 horsepower and 0 to 60 in just 3.5 seconds. Insane for a 9,000-pound truck. It's interesting to finally get my hands on this. Obviously, the Hummer brand revived now as a GMC EV truck, but more importantly, with all sorts of cool off-road tech and features I'll be sharing with you today. And the thing is, when it comes to this vehicle, every time I get behind the wheel, I just can't help but giggle. Getting right into it, this is the key for the Hummer EV. Yes, it is branded, which is a nice touch, but it feels just like any other GMC key for the most part, and the button functionality is basically the same thing, with obviously some of this specific to the Hummer that also has the power amenities that I'll show you here in a sec. Another cool feature is actually when you find this thing and you approach it in a parking lot, it's also got approach lighting where it'll actually light up as you see there in the front, showing you the Hummer EV, and at night it helps to illuminate obviously a lot of the floor around the vehicle, which I think is just a really nice luxurious touch. You'll also note that it has power folding mirrors, which are currently in, but if we go to unlock the vehicle, for example, you'll see those open up quite quickly, and therefore just helps to try and protect it a little bit more because it is fairly big, as you can see here, barely fitting in this particular parking space. So all that little bit to condense it down does definitely help and provides a little bit of peace of mind. Now, this particular Hummer EV SUV is finished in solar orange, a fantastic neon color here that'll definitely make sure you never lose this thing in any parking lot and should make for some killer off-road shots as well. Getting into all the various features of this nearly 9,000-pound Hummer SUV, there's a lot of cool stuff going on here and some optional equipment on this particular one. The first thing I want to show you is actually here in the front. Using the key, there's a couple different other ways that you can open it as well. I actually want to show you the frunk. So you go ahead and hold it here, and it's fully power operated. It can fully lift this thing up, and you can see it's absolutely massive as well. And obviously this is one of the many benefits of an EV is the additional storage space. In this case, you have this massive storage space which you can use for luggage or whatever you need to. But the cool part is that the way that GM actually designed this was so that you can take all of your infinity roof panels, of which you have 4 here on top of the vehicle. They are all individually removable, which means even if you just the driver want yours off, you could do that and leave all the other 3 on, but then all 4 of them neatly stow here in the front, meaning you still get your full hatchback SUV storage space, and you can pretend like there was an engine here, but instead you can store all of your physical panels, which I think is a super cool detail. In here is also where you'll find things like the washer. It comes with some auxiliary ports, including lighting, and obviously currently it's being used to store some extra items. To close it, it's also power closing, so kind of the same thing. You hold it down, and so it comes down to make sure it doesn't bump into anything and clear successfully, and you can close up the front of your Hummer EV. Next, I want to just go ahead and take you to the back so we can show you the other power amenity, of course, being the rear hatch. Now, this is kind of a cool one because as you can see, it's fairly sizable and is currently storing a spare tire, but go ahead and whip out that key again and you can open this up. Same thing, there are a couple different ways to actually open up this rear hatch, but fully power operated as well. Inside you can see the Hummer EV branded logos here. We also have this nice fun topographic moon map here, some storage pockets, outlets, and of course controls here for the seats and even our rear scissor jack, which doesn't seem like nearly enough for this. And then underneath you can see some additional tool and storage item areas below this vehicle. So that's a quick look at the thing, and same thing, this also power operates to close it. Hold that, and then that'll actually close the rear hatch for you. So you don't even have to really touch anything except the actual door handles for the overall accessibility of the Hummer EV. So if you're gonna make something this crazy, why not fill it with all this cool tech, right? Now, let's get into some of the specific features. First, I wanna talk about just how big this is and the important stuff like ground clearance. So let's kind of start underneath the vehicle, if you will. Standard here is 12 inches of ground clearance. Very, very respectable until you realize that this has full adaptive air suspension all around that can actually lift itself up. It can put itself in extract mode, which lifts it an additional 6 inches. So when you look at the base specs for this thing, you have to realize that all of it can be improved just by messing around with some buttons. The only downside to the extract mode is it's only offered when in the terrain mode, and it limits your speed to 12 miles per hour. But to be honest, it looks a little bit awkward and gangly with how tall it is, and so it's really only meant for climbing boulders or fording rivers, which, yes, this can ford rivers despite being an EV. The other thing is, with the way that they designed the skateboard pack itself, which is the main chassis deck and puts all the batteries down below, in itself weighs around 3,000 pounds, which it's quite heavy. Now, the advantage of that would be in terms of the way that the construction works and off-roading benefits. Oftentimes we talk about center of gravity and off-roading and the potential ability to tilt. This is still a very heavy vehicle, but by having all that weight down low, that improves technically the center of gravity and lowers it, which is a great advantage as well, not to mention the other EV benefits. So I think all of that is pretty cool. You have fully independent suspension with these massive airbags. The airbags can do all sorts of cool features. Not only do they lift the vehicle up, but they can also set it down a little bit lower than the standard ride height to make it easier for getting in and out of this massive beast. So lots of cool benefits. And another additional feature is, of course, the rear wheel steering. This is, or all-wheel steering as you might call it. This isn't something that's new to GM. Of course, there's the quadra-steer days, but this has all sorts of cool benefits. When it comes to particularly heavy vehicles, rear wheel steering is becoming more and more popular these days. It can sort of fake you out of how heavy the vehicle actually is to make it feel like it's driving smoother. It's definitely noticeable when it kicks in on this vehicle, and it works in all sorts of different ways. It can turn the opposite direction as the front wheels in order to give you a tighter turn radius, which is always appreciated, or it can turn the same direction when doing things like on the freeway to provide high-speed stability. Additionally, it also works with the crab walk feature, which actually is a crazy thing that tries to drive the vehicle sideways and feels like slowly sliding on ice. It's a really, really interesting feature. But those are some of the many things, and I would argue what's going on underneath without just seeing this in a parking lot is really some of the coolest features of the vehicle. Now, getting into some of the extra details, we of course have this front package, and there's a lot of cool stuff in the front here, especially with this main lighting array. Obviously, there's all these cool logos. You have this sort of H pattern that's etched into the glass, along with Hummer EV and even the GMC badge, which is kind of interesting to see at a Hummer. But then these lights do a bunch of things. Obviously, they help with approach. They let you know turn signals and indicators, for example, but then they also give you the charging status when you plug the vehicle in. And so there's a lot of cool things going on with the actual technology and the visible presence of the vehicle. You also have these additional fog lights down below. You also get these very, very rugged tow hooks. And then underneath, another cool part is while you can see the sort of front skid plate here to also help protect with things like the road bashing, for example, but then there's also armor entirely underneath the vehicle, all the way back through, which also helps to do things like protect your battery pack, for example, because while there's no engine or oil pan to protect, you still need to protect those batteries. You have all sorts of parking sensors and cameras throughout, and some of the cameras, particularly in the front and the rear, are actually waterproof to make them useful for water fording. That's an incredibly smart thing to do. As you continue forward here, you have a very upright windshield in classic sort of H1 fashion. You can see how upright the A-pillars are here. You have the, of course, semi-truck-like lighting, and then uniquely 3 wipers, which is very cool. And then this one also has the optional lights here, which currently have their little Hummer EV covers on them, which is a nice touch. Your 3X or 2X badging is located here at the top, telling you whether you have a 3-motor or 2-motor, and then you even get this little guy here, which is kind of a nice Easter egg. Moving on to the wheel and tire package itself. These, I think, are my favorite wheels that are available on these vehicles, and they are these massive 22-inch Hummer wheels, which of course clear the fairly sizable brakes as well. They're even Hummer EV branded on the center caps, the little Hummer logos around here, and then even the Hummer EV logo on the outside. So I think they look great. From there, they're wrapped in these 35-inch Goodyear Wrangler Territory tires, which of course are meant to be fairly quiet as well here on the Hummer EV. As it is an EV, you would notice tire noise now that much more. They're also integrated with some of the interior systems, which we could talk about more in a sec. Another cool part is sort of all this contrast you see here isn't just black plastic, but as you can see, it's actually all painted, and it has a very metallic, sparkly finish, which does make it feel much more premium as opposed to just being generic generic black plastic. Over here you have these massive mirrors, which yes, have some integrated camera systems for your safety and being able to see around the vehicle. And as big as they are, I'm not sure they're big enough. Fortunately, they do have things like your actual blind spot monitoring, so you can tell what's going on around you and see if there's any little cars hanging out in your rear quarter, which can always be hard to see, but still a nice touch. This one also has these aluminum step railings here. These are actually fixed. They don't move out of the way, but again, make it easier to get in and out of the vehicle, but can sometimes be a little bit of a nuisance. But when it's lifted all the way up, you'll definitely appreciate it. Additionally, you have keyless entry on not just the front, but all 4 doors, which is a nice touch. So with the key in your pocket, you can walk up to even the rear doors, touch the button, open it up, and get right in. You also have a nice little Easter egg back here with this American flag. You have a a squared setup with a similar setup here for the rear wheels and tires. Over here on the driver's side is where you're actually going to locate your battery port. So this is where you can get access to charge your vehicle, of course, with the options for the fast charger equipment as well. And that is all a great experience. Back here, more LED lighting in terms of the way the taillights are designed, essentially the same as the front with the sort of H logo now turned sideways, if you will, for your taillights. More of that sparkly controls back here, a power lowering rear window here in the back, similar above marker lighting. You have your spare tire, which is actually mounted on a camera system as well here with the Hummer logo embedded. So one of the interesting things in terms of the overall performance of this vehicle as well is while the approach and departure angles are very, very impressive at over 40 degrees. Obviously, they improve once you put it into the extract mode, but then Hummer will even tell you if you actually remove the spare tire, of course, of which you can also slide into the back hatch, then that'll also improve your rear departure angles. So there's some important things there. All those stats can be increased in the extract mode, and you also have upwards of 30 inches of waterfording capabilities in this EV. So just because it's now a GMC and it's now an EV, this Hummer is still very, very capable and has a lot going on even on the outside. So next, let's talk powertrains, of which there are 2 different options for the Hummer EV. The first one is the 2X or 2 motor, and of course we have the one we're driving today, which is the 3X or 3 motor. There is of course a price difference by a couple $1,000s there between the 2 different trims. They are both all-wheel drive, meaning all 4 wheels are powered, and they do have different power discrepancies. The 2 is in somewhere in the 500 range, and in here with the 3 motor, it's rated for 830 horsepower, which is a lot of power in its own right, but then again, this is a nearly 9,000 pound SUV. Where it gets interesting is the torque figure from GM is 11,500 pound-feet of torque, which is unheard of. But here's why that's so crazy. It's an EV, so the numbers mean a little bit different things. All of your power is kind of always available all the time, and you can use it differently here in this vehicle. And therefore, when you press on the pedal, whether you're using the WTF, watts to freedom launch control, or just in general driving like what we're doing now, the vehicle moves. I want you to take a look around me and see the current status of the windows, and in the minute you apply throttle, oh my God, it points the hood at the moon. It literally just squats it back and then it takes off. It's an insane experience, and it's unlike anything else I've ever driven. It's funny because you can be looking at something in a rear view mirror. The minute you apply the throttle, that's gone. You're looking at something totally different. You're essentially staring at the ground as this thing takes off with that off-road suspension and all of the power. GM quotes the performance figures as 0 to 60 in 3.5 seconds. And yeah, I can confirm that this is really, really fast. It's just kind of crazy as it can feel like it pulls you all over the road with the off-road suspension and all of that power that it's trying to deliver at once. So it is quite the experience. It's definitely safe to say that it is not slow or underpowered by any stretch of the imagination, despite being so heavy. Now moving on to the range-specific features, of course, very important for any EV. It's actually kind of the same regardless of which one you go with. The 2X is rated for 315 miles of range. The 3X is rated for 312 miles of range, so really kind of the same thing, right? It's all totally usable range. I haven't seen any awkward or weird characteristics with the way that it's been declining. You also have plenty of regen, and if anything, I feel like that maybe those numbers could technically be underestimated. It feels like the vehicle can be surprisingly efficient in certain instances, doing all sorts of clever things in the background, like lowering itself to try to be more efficient on the highway, and just, you know, managing how it adjusts things while also trying to remind you as the driver that, like, hey, your climate control, for example, example, is sucking a lot of juice. You may want to turn that off for better consumption, for example. So all sorts of interesting tech in terms of the range, but it's all totally usable, totally practical here in the Hummer EV. The powertrains are pretty straightforward, and all of your displays do a good job of trying to explain to you what's happening. The part that I can't get enough of is just how fast this thing is. Unbelievable how it does it so silently too. This is just a crazy, crazy automobile. So next, let's take a closer look at the interior, which comes in your favorite flavor of either the Lunar Horizon, which is what we have here, or the Lunar Shadow interior, which is obviously a darker version, Horizon being this lighter white color. And obviously you'll see a lot of moon themes throughout the vehicle, but there's also some cool touches, like for example, some of the factory stickers, and even items noting that this is in fact a very, very heavy vehicle. Now moving on to the specifics. First, I want to start with the door card and sort of some of the cool interior tidbits. You can see there's lots of fun shapes, and just everything that they went about it was sort of a fun, let's do it because we can mentality. I really love the embossed Hummer EV logos here. Even here for the Bose sound system, this is supposed to be a sort of topographic map, for example, but of the moon, with even a little boot print that is of course from an astronaut. You have some storage down below here. You have a lot of your memory seat settings, lock unlock, your window controls and mirror adjustments all found here in the driver's door card, with a nice handle here to just pull everything shut. As you move on to the main interior itself, you can see that this vehicle is set up to seat a total of 5, including that rear seat there. The seats themselves also have some nice Hummer EV branding. Even though this is a rigid hard point, you don't really notice it sitting in the seat. The seats themselves are quite comfortable. They have some slight bolstering here to help hold you in place during some rocky driving, but they also have some leg bolstering without ruining the ease of actually getting in or out of the vehicle or total comfort. Here, in the actual door sill, you also have this really fun logo that looks very similar to what's on the front of the vehicle. It's essentially the same H's like you'd see on either side of the headlights with that center grille section. Even things like the floor mats, for example, Hummer EV branded, but again, more of that topographic map styling. And then of course, being an EV also gives you the benefit of having the under storage here, which again, more of that rubber mat with the topographic styling. So you can sort of see the entire theme throughout. You also have all sorts of squares. So these vents are very hilariously squared, and they're absolutely massive, as you can see in comparison to my hand, which just makes it very quirky and is just a reminder of the excessiveness, let's say, of the size of the vehicle, while still having things like these nice door handles for getting in and out. You can also see the infinity roof here, which the fun fact of this roof here, of course, being that you can remove one panel at a time if just one person on the inside of the vehicle wants it removed. And you can sort of see by looking through them that they give you a safari-like experience while still having a slight tint to it, let's say, to keep some of that bright sunlight out. I do want to show you this panel here, which has a lot of really cool features just before we get in, which includes the electronic parking brake, but of course you see the things you would expect, like a button to actually open the frunk, and then you also have the rear hatch, you have your lane keep assist, and then this button, which you really won't see on any other vehicles, is kind of interesting. It has a down arrow, and then you can see the windows, and what this does is you push it and it actually lowers every single window into the car at once, including the back window. Now the only downside to this is that you can't use the same button to raise them all. You instead have to use all of your controls here, and of course the rear window control at the top there to actually raise them all back up. From there, you have your charging buttons and of course your brightness adjustments, and you can see that the steering column itself is power adjustable with some fun buttons on the back here we'll talk about in a bit, and then you also have your power adjustments for your seat here. With that, let's go ahead and climb in so we can start it up and take a look at everything else. So with that, when you first get into the vehicle, you can see everything starts to illuminate as it acknowledges your presence. And go ahead and fire it up with the keyless entry. And of course, there's no noise because it's an EV, obviously. Now, getting into some of the details, there's a lot of cool stuff going on here. You can see that little screen that just lit up at the very top of the steering wheel as well, and then some of your driver assistance items that are available. But then you have two main screens here, obviously one in front of the driver, and then one here for your center infotainment. The first thing I want to say is, even on the inside, it feels like a Hummer H1. You can see just how vertical these A-pillars are, and it has this very squared off experience, but it is quite spacious and has some things that you'll find in previous Hummer models. So for example, even the ability to have these storage cubbies is things you can see found in other Hummer models, and then lots of nice logos and branding throughout that just fits the overall theme. Starting right in front of me, you have this massive steering wheel that is very comfortable, of course, wrapped in leather and is even heated. And then in here, you'll find all sorts sorts of controls, including things like the lane keep assist, and you also have some of your cruise control adjustments, and then your adjustments for managing all of your digital displays as well. The main digital display right in front of the driver is pretty straightforward, I think, for the most part. It shows you your charge, it shows you your use case over here, and of course things like your range and all that, and you can also sort of thumb through it and adjust whatever you want to be able to look at right in front of you, with of course additional options being in the center infotainment screen. So I think that's pretty straightforward. I think it's pretty intuitive, relatively speaking, for what's available, because I don't know, this to me is everything you need, right? There's not really a whole lot of systems to monitor, and of course this can kind of vary while you're actually driving. Here on the side, you have these stocks here, and of course your turn signals and lighting adjustments, and then over here you have your wiper adjustments for that crazy 3-wiper setup. As we move here to the infotainment, there is a lot going on in this infotainment, and there are some really interesting characteristics. Now, of course, this is a touchscreen infotainment system, as you would have guessed, but what's interesting is, although you can see all of your climate controls located down below, of which case the Hummer EV is actually a 3-zone climate control, meaning the front has 2 separate adjustments, and then you have the rear, which is actually separate, which is kind of a nice touch to have different temperatures throughout the vehicle. Now, located here in the front, as I mentioned earlier, this is not uncommon to see your climate controls located low for your infotainment system. What is a little bit weird is the fact that these are not so much activated through the touch controls, as you can see here. The touch controls don't actually work, and instead you have to use all of these toggle switches below, and so that's how you actually control your fan speed, as you can see there, which does have these cool graphic animations. But then let's say you want to start adjusting things. Well, it gets interesting that way, because you can see currently we have our ventilated seats on, but if I want to adjust that, I first have to push this down, and then you go over here, but you can't go up, you can only go down, and so you have to cycle through this all again to turn on those ventilated seats, or push down to activate the heated seats, for example. And once you're done, you then push the toggle switches to push that all away. So the weird part to that to me is that this should have also had the option to use the touchscreen rather than just these toggle switches, but you'll definitely get used to that in no time, and obviously they have ridges and sort of separations so you know which switch you are pushing specifically. Same thing goes for adjusting the actual differences here in terms of where the fans are spitting out air. Moving on to the actual touchscreen here. There's a lot in here, and it can be kind of overwhelming at first glance, because you have all of these what seem to be quick navigation menus, but within every quick navigation menu you also have additional items, and then from there you can even adjust things. So for example, here on the main menu you can actually thumb through some of these items here on the side, and so it gives you a couple different options for everything that's available. This also brings up the point that it has Google navigation built in, which is fantastic, because we've all been there where we've had some terrible proprietary navigation system that never leads you to the right place, but in this case you get Google, and so you know it's going to be accurate. And of course, as you can see with our little notification here, it actually is pretty helpful with finding charging stations for you. So it even has its own little dedicated button up here, and I used it earlier and it worked fantastic, and even told me which ones specifically had things like fast chargers and which ones were just regular chargers. Now, moving on to the vehicle section, this is of course where things get more exciting and you highlight the specific use case of the Hummer EV. Now, as you start taking a look here, there's all sorts of various cool off-road stuff here. Things like, of course, your direction indicators, your status of the vehicle even, and in the parking sensors where all that's being taken a look at. You also have all sorts of cool off-road modes. In this menu is where you'll see things like the actual pitch and roll indicators and just what the vehicle's doing, so you can monitor that more closely. But it's also where you'll find your auxiliary controls. So if you wanted to add additional lights, a winch, whatever that is, this is where you'll find your auxiliary buttons. I think it's kind of a shame that they happen to be buried in a menu like this, because that means technically if you start from the home screen, you now have several button pushes to get to that. So first you have to click on the vehicle, that loads up. It wouldn't start there. Then you start here, then you have to click on the Hummer vehicle, and then now you get access to your auxiliary buttons. I would have liked to see maybe just an instant access push button somewhere in the vehicle, but granted, there is a lot of space currently taken up by all sorts of buttons at the moment. Anyways, moving on, another very cool feature of the Hummer EV are the cameras. This has up to 17 different camera operations, as you see here, and the reason this is so important is this is quite the tall vehicle, and so while you're off-roading, you want to be accurate with where you're putting your wheels and tires and seeing exactly what the vehicle's doing, and these cameras make that possible. So as you see here, when you click on some of these different options, you can see that's the front-looking cameras, which also helps with waterfording, for example, and then here in the back, you have the reverse option. Same thing with the back here. You can see what's what's going on there, and you also have your front equivalent. So you have all of these different adjustments, including the ability to monitor your actual towing. So if you wanted to see what the tow hitch is doing, all of that is actually available in the vehicle, which I think is pretty nice as far as giving the total functionality. So you can see everything that's going on, literally the front and the rear wheels, and it just lets you be, I guess, responsible, but also be a better off-roader because of that. Additionally, you have some other cool off-road features. You can see this is the air down mode here, and so while it doesn't necessarily help to deflate all of the tires itself, it'll allow you to set the deflate controls, let's say, so you can then go out, deflate, and then the truck will actually honk and let you know when it's to the correct tire pressure. And of course, over here you have some more of those auxiliary controls, as we sort of talked about earlier, for things that you can sort of hook up to connect and use. Of course, you also have things like smartphone integration, Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, the navigation, Sirius XM, all of that's also available here. And then this is also where you're going to, of course, display all of the various drive modes, which I want to kind of direct your attention to this controller here, which adds some really interesting functionality. So first of all, the rotations are how you're going to actually select the drive modes. So as it loads up here, you can see the first one is normal on the moon. Then you also have the My mode, which is your own customizable mode. And then you also have the off-road mode, which is more so a casual off-roading mode. And then you also have terrain mode, which, as you can see, is more so meant to be the rock crawling, river fording mode, whereas the off-road mode is the more generic Mars climbing version for your off-road modes. And then of course you even have a tow road, which in this case actually shows your big old rocket in the back, which is kind of a fun feature. So that's kind of the basis of it. A lot of things can actually change in these modes, and it's also important to clarify that some things like the extract mode are actually only offered once you're already in the terrain mode. So from there you can actually use the adjustments that you see here to raise and lower the air suspension. When you do that, it'll show you here in the main display whether you're actually raising the ride height. And to get it into the extract mode, the vehicle must first be in the terrain mode, which also limits your speed to 12 miles per hour. But then you can also enable or disable some features which automatically lower the vehicle when it's parked to make it easier to get in and out. If you don't like that, you can also disable that. The other interesting feature that you'll see here is this button, which is actually your rear wheel steering. What's cool about this, and rear wheel steering is a nice feature, right, that's been added to a lot of different vehicles, mostly to help improve maneuverability in particularly heavy vehicles. And I think the nice thing about adding the functionality here to turn it on or off is some people might not like the way it drives in normal city instances. Of course, you want it in off-roading because it'll tighten that turn radius, and you'll even have the crab mode. But that really does a lot in terms of, you know, the functionality. Like, some people are really freaked out by it and don't want it. And so I think it's nice that they integrated that and made it so easy to actively turn on or off. The other thing that this button does is when you hold it, that's actually going to activate your crab mode. As you can see here, cool info and graphics, and that is going to change how the rear wheel steering responds. You can even see it puts a little crab logo on the dash, and what that's going to do now is, rather than automatically decide whether it's going to turn the same direction or opposite direction depending on the use case, instead the crab mode is going to try to make the vehicle drive diagonally, mostly turning them the same direction. And so the vehicle starts to move at like a 45-degree angle, and I would describe the feeling as like slowly sliding on ice is probably the best way to do that. And to get out of that, you simply just tap your rear wheel steering button again. All in all, I quite like the rear wheel steering, and I will say it's very obvious when it kicks in, but it's a great feature to have for such an off-road focused vehicle. Lastly is this thing over here. If you push that, it just brings up an email where they want you to message them with your ideas for the next generation of Hummer, which is kind of a nice touch. Over here you also have some of your trailer controls, wireless charger with additional options here to actually plug in some extra devices. This of course is our shifter, which if you're familiar with just any truck will feel it right at home. Of course you just push the button, put it into drive. Once you put it in reverse, that brings up your reverse cameras, which as you can imagine can also give you the predictive options for backing up. And then to put it in park, you also just have your main parking mode there. I also forgot to mention some of the battery options here for some of the regen modes and additional buttons for actually adjusting just your various controls that are available in front of the infotainment system. Moving back over here, your cup holders are hidden under this nice little pocket here that just pops open and closed and looks pretty premium when it's shut. You have a nice storage box here which can perfectly fit any phone, but they can also be opened up to store a variety of different items. In this case, our press car actually comes with an adapter charger because GM is again improving their charging system, or their outlet outlets as a source, and so you get more options if you have adapters, for example, for your Hummer EV. Next, I want to point your attention to the top. So up here, we of course have our infinity roof, but you'll also find your controls here. This is what's going to control your actual rear window. You have your lights, your OnStar, your light adjustment here, your gate or garage controls, and then of course you have these big, wide, backlit mirror sun visors here up top. To remove the roof is actually quite easy. Thank goodness it's a toolless job. You actually just pull these pieces out, as you can see there, and then once you've done that for both the front and the rear, they have these little latches, so you just pull them out a certain way, and then you can now remove those roof panels and enjoy an open top experience. So I would say realistically you could remove one of these panels in just 30 seconds, and then of course, as I mentioned earlier, they all nicely stow in the front of the vehicle. So as you can see here, it's quite an interesting interior. It feels very quirky in terms of the way they designed it. It's kind of the opposite of a Mini Cooper, where instead of circles, everything is now squares and even oversized to some comic extent, but then it has a ton of features. I will say this, if you're first looking at one of these vehicles at a dealership, it will feel definitely overwhelming, I think, on the inside in terms of all of the features and functionality. But the reality of it is I think as you start to use the vehicle, you'll get used to a lot of the various features that you see on the inside. And what that'll do is that'll mean you'll get it set up for you, and then you won't have to worry about fidgeting with things. And the things that are important to you, like the camera access, for example, you'll know how to jump to it in a quick instance, for example. And so that'll make things pretty much straightforward as far as the overall usability. I think I may have forgotten to mention earlier, but you also have your heated seats, traction control, hazards, and parking sensors all located down below here. But yeah, that's what I think of the Hummer EV. It'll be a little bit overwhelming at first. Reading the owner's manual and all that will definitely help with your usability of the vehicle, but once you get it set up and right for you, I think it all kind of falls naturally in place, and you'll be messing around with it in no time, especially this dial here, or the fun dial, so to speak, that has all of your drive modes, suspension adjustments, and even your rear wheel steering and crab walk mode. So next, I'd like to show you the back of the Hummer EV. You'll find a similar color treatment for the interior here, including this nice fold-down armrest here with cup holders, but it can seat a total of 3 here. They even have some slight bolsters to make it a little bit more comfortable in the seats. And as you can see, it is quite large here in the back, and they get a similar treatment as the front as well for the way that the actual top panels are located in the vehicle. But that's not all. What I do want to show you here is right in the center is very cool. You'll find here the climate control center for the rear seats. They also get their own pocket, their own chargers throughout the vehicle as well, and even their own vents, but more importantly, their own controls. You can actually independently adjust their fan speed here in the back along with the temperature, but for the outermost seats, they also get heated seats, which is kind of a nice touch, which makes it quite luxurious here in the back, meaning you can take all sorts of people in here and be comfortable in all sorts of conditions, especially for the back. But you probably want to know, what's it like to actually sit back here? Well, with me, I am 6 foot even for reference, and as you can see, I fit in here quite comfortably. Not only do my knees not actually touch the back seat with it set up for me in the front, but additionally, I have plenty of headroom. In fact, the really cool part is that I can actually see straight out of the glass, and so to some extent, it almost feels like a safari trip type vehicle where you could look straight out of the glass and see the giraffes, for example. But it's very, very spacious back here. Whether you need to haul adults, fold the seats down for cargo, or your family, that's no problem here in the Hummer EV. All right, accelerate quickly. Whoa! Okay. What's it like to drive the Hummer EV? Well, first of all, like I said at the beginning of the video, it makes me giggle whenever I'm behind the wheel of this thing. Inside, it feels just like a Hummer, honestly, in terms of the overall feel of the vehicle, the way the glass is lit out. It feels just like an H1 specifically, and so that's a lot of fun. But then when you get on it, especially here in the 3X with a 3-motor version, it's got 830 horsepower, which doesn't sound like a whole lot when you consider the fact that this thing weighs 9,000 pounds. But because it's an EV, that means you have instant power and all of it available immediately. And so you get that 0 to 60 time of just 3.5 seconds. And boy, do you feel that. But then the funny part is, because it's an off-road vehicle and has that, big, lofty off-road suspension, it rocks back, and essentially anything that was visible in your rear view mirror is no longer visible. All of your mirrors become useless because your truck is now at a 90-degree angle doing a wheelie. It's not actually doing a wheelie, but you get the idea of how it feels to accelerate in this thing, and it can feel like it's a little bit all over the road when you are full pedal down. Now, fortunately, if you have any restraint, you don't have to drive with the pedal all the way down in the Hummer EV. You can drive it like a normal vehicle, in which case it is totally civil and drives just fine. The first thing I want to talk about is probably what's on everybody's mind, and that is perhaps the rear wheel steering. That is a characteristic that we're kind of seeing more of in this day and age, not just on EVs, but you can also find it in things like bigger, heavier sedans and wagons, and it's a way to sort of cleverly hide or get rid of some of the characteristics that might come with very heavy vehicles, make them feel more maneuverable and such. And so it could be a little bit different if you're not familiar with it, but it's a pretty good system. And the smart thing that they did here is that they made it very easy to adjust. So you actually have a dedicated button for the all-wheel steering or rear wheel steering, whatever you want to call it. There's a dedicated button, and so you can turn it between several different modes. You can turn it totally off if you want nothing to do with it and you don't like the way that it kicks in, or it also has an auto mode and stuff like that. And so that flexibility, I think, makes it even more approachable to most people, and so that was a very intelligent thing to do. Now, obviously, that feature specifically is one of the coolest features of this vehicle, especially the flexibility and performance that it gives you off-road is why it's so important. Now, back to the regular road driving characteristics of the vehicle. Let's talk about it. The other big thing that you're probably thinking about is the sheer size of this vehicle, and that is a valid concern. And what I want to say about that is it's really easy to drive. I mean, the fact that it's an EV, you have e-pass, power steering, and all this other stuff, all the modern safety features such as lane keep assist and all those other items. And so it's really easy to actually stay in the lanes in this vehicle. And although it looks big, and it is big, I would say once you're actually driving it on the road, it's pretty easy to keep it in the lanes, especially with all the modern safety assists. Now, does that save you from making it easier to park? Not necessarily. I would say it's still pretty hard to park, and if you live in a city where you know your parking spots are narrow, you're gonna have a tough time in this when it comes to those environments. But the actual driving use case for this is quite impressive. The other thing I've been impressed with is actually the range. I thought I would have a little bit of range anxiety with this as it started to wear down, but it's actually been really good in terms of the total usability. The total range differences is only 312 versus 315 miles from the 2-motor to the 3-motor. But I will say this, it feels like actual legitimate range. I feel as though if anything, it's beyond that. That feels like a minimum range to me, because as I've been driving this, it feels like I've been gotten a lot more than that out of the total range of the vehicle. The other benefit is, if you want to daily drive this vehicle, use it regularly, you can of course quick charge this, which is available. Now just know you do pay more to quick charge a vehicle at charging stations, or you can of course keep it charged at your home, and that's the thing that it recommends. In fact, Hummer themselves actually recommend trying to keep the vehicle around 80% for daily driving usage. So it's definitely recommended for all sorts of fun features in that sense. And the range isn't anything to be concerned about. I haven't obviously tried towing or anything with it, but I've been pretty impressed, and to say the least, I guess my point is that I haven't been worried about the overall range, no range anxiety. It even has fun displays that kind of tell you how your energy is currently being utilized in the vehicle, whether it's being dominated like your climate control because it's 100 degrees here in Phoenix, like mine is, or just driving, or etc., whatever the case is. So with that, we're going to get on the freeway here in a bit, and that's going to bring me on to some of the other characteristics of the vehicle, just in terms of how it feels in terms of overall performance, let's say, wind noise, quiet, etc. Overall, I think it's pretty good. In regular driving use cases, I don't think it's going to feel out of place. If anything, I would say it's been very, very comfortable in terms of the actual ride quality, but you kind of expect that, right? When you have air suspension that is bigger than all 4 units on some cars on one corner, you kind of expect it to be a pretty good air suspension system, right? So that's not to be too surprising there. But it handles a lot of the bumps really, really well. It feels, dare I say, almost like a proper smooth luxury car to some extent, which is kind of a funny thing to think about. But it offers a lot of cool, compelling things. The sound system is pretty good, and then you also have the other benefits of having the instant available torque in this thing too. The other thing is the ride height. If you're someone that just likes to be high up in your vehicles, whether that's to see further ahead or whatever, you've got that here, and that's without even having to put it in the extract mode or any of the crazy off-road modes. It just sits high up in general, and so you're basically looking down on every vehicle out there. Even regular SUVs and trucks feel quite small in comparison to this thing. Look at that! I kid you not. When you slam on the accelerator in this thing, the front has to rise like 5 degrees. It's honestly insane. Earlier, obviously, was a bit of a embellishment of the truth in terms of the overall change, but boy. All right, so now we're on the freeway. We're getting up to freeway speeds here. And there's definitely a little bit more noise in the cabin, so it's not nearly as quiet as it is in regular driving. That being said, we also have the radio off, and we also have the AC basically on full blast to try and keep us as comfortable as possible. And so it's really not that bad though. And I would say you're gonna get some noise regardless because you have those big beefy tires on this thing, and obviously it's still shaped like a brick, and so there's nothing pleasing to the air about that. So some wind noise, some wheel and tire terrain noise is kind of to be expected in this, but I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. I think that you just kind of come to terms with that when you're looking at an off-road vehicle like this. The real benefit, I think, is just how smooth it is. When I'm sitting here on the freeway, like that was a pretty big bump. You're watching the cars in front of you kind of go over the road to try and recover, and this thing just eats it. Without a doubt, you can fly over speed bumps in this thing. I'm sure if you decided that you were going to drive over a median, I'm not even sure you might notice while driving this thing. That's the real benefit of it. And it's also pretty efficient as well. Obviously, as you go higher into the speed range, if you live in an area that has the higher freeway speed limits, like 75 and such, you might notice that your efficiency starts to drop a little bit more dramatically, which that's the exact same characteristic as any gas vehicle, right? Once you start to get to the 75, 80 mile per hour range, your efficiency starts to drop pretty dramatically. So you can find that it's best suited around 60 miles per hour, let's say, in terms of being totally efficient. But the range itself, I like it, and that makes it super practical. It's also enough range where you can still drive it and take it places. And with the flexibility of the fast charging means that if you want to drive it somewhere, let's say you live in California or Arizona in my case, and want to take it to Utah, I'm confident that you should be able to find fast charging outlets between here and there where you could actually do the road trip in a reasonable amount of time without too much stress or duress on your part. And you could take this to Moab, for example, if you wanted to. Now, charging in some of those areas obviously isn't necessarily guaranteed, and so you have to do your research ahead of time, make sure you have your charging areas where you can do all that, but I dig it. I think this thing is pretty proper. Off-road, it feels like a tank. The extract mode combined with the rear wheel steering, which is so unique. It's such a different experience having that crab walk feature while in addition to having the rear steering, and you feel it kick in. I'm not going to tell you that the rear wheel steering isn't noticeable. It's totally noticeable when it kicks in, at least when you're doing slow driving and you feel it try to shorten your turn radius, but you want it to do that. I would think if you drive it enough in the auto mode, you'll eventually get used to it, and then you can just enjoy everything that the Hummer EV has to offer, which I think is fantastic. So there you have it. I would say for this vehicle, is it a lot of money? Yes, absolutely, and there's probably a good reason why they're not selling so well. It's a lot of money, it's an EV, and not everybody necessarily wants an EV like this in their life, but it's a really cool vehicle. The amount of effort that GM and their engineers have put into this vehicle, I think, speaks for itself. The features are insanely cool. They did all of the right steps there in terms of making this stand out and giving it these crazy characteristics, but I also want you to think about just the layout of this vehicle and how it can be beneficial off-road, right? Yes, it weighs a lot, but at the same time, you have that skateboard deck so low that can help with the center of gravity. You have instant torque available, so you can go as slow as you want or as fast as you want on a trail, and you always have all of that power available to you, and that can be a real benefit, I think, on the off-road trails. And you mix that with the fact that this is obviously a efficient, green daily driver as an EV, there's a lot of potential for this thing as your, let's say, main vehicle, right? So if you're interested in this, I think it's worth checking out. It's a pretty special vehicle. It's a very expensive special vehicle, but boy, I really like this thing. I think it's really cool. and I love everything that's been done to it. It's certainly unique, and it feels like the ridiculousness of the Hummer. When the H1 first debuted, that was something that was just polarizing to people. They couldn't process how wide and big that thing was, and this is the same thing, but in the modern era. So, well done, I think, now that it's a GMC EV. One heck of a vehicle. Definitely worth checking out with lots of cool features. With that, that's the end of the video. So thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it and could leave me a thumbs up, I'd really appreciate it. And don't forget to get subscribed for more content like this in the future. With that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.